In this video, we'll be going through an intermediary level P&L, and we'll be adding two concepts to the initial P&L that we can build upon. To recap the first video in the series, we started off with what a P&L export will typically look like for an e-commerce brand with revenue bundled with all of its expenses. We went through why marketing wins do not equal financial wins and the importance of this series. We then dived into how you can restructure the P&L to get better insights into next steps and action items within marketing and how that correlates into the actual profit and loss statement. And then lastly, we broke the P&L down into the three core expense buckets and went through how important these percentage allocations are to trickle down into profit and how you can obviously use this structure to infer allocation towards marketing. In this video, we'll be building two concepts on top of that. Number one is we'll be adding an additional 4 line items to the P&L that sit above net revenue. And number two is we'll be going into splitting the P&L based on first time or returning customers, which is an incredibly valuable skill to have that's going to really revolutionize the way that you approach acquisition, particularly for brands that have high returning customer rates. And so let's dive into the first edition here and start breaking this down. So what we've added that didn't exist in the first P&L that you saw in video 1 is the first P&L that you should be very familiar with by now is net revenue going down all the way to EBITDA. And what we've done with the intermediary level P&L is we've added this extra section up the top here that encapsulates gross revenue, discounts, returns, and shipping. Now, all of these 4 line items are available within Shopify to export and put straight into this P&L. They should also be within other platforms in which you'd be hosting a website and processing revenue. And you would hope that this is also getting pulled into Xero or QuickBooks or whatever accounting software the business is using, but typically it isn't. Now, why is this even important? Why would we want to segment out gross revenue, discounts, returns, and shipping to then collate or summate, up to net revenue? What's the point? Why don't we just skip to net revenue? The reason why net revenue in isolation is not the most valuable metric is because it doesn't show the core demand levers that might underlie this metric and how it's being impacted. And so let me provide you with a quick example. The discount line item within Shopify unfortunately doesn't encapsulate markdowns. It only encapsulates discounts being used on the website. Now, what do I actually mean by that in case you're not aware of that terminology? If you have a $90 product on the website and we go into Black Friday and we decide to just physically mark it down on the website to $80, and so on Shopify, this will typically look like this, and then there'll be the little gray $90 that's hashed out. And then when you add to cart, you're adding an $80 product to cart and you're going through the checkout process. This is what's called a markdown because the prices are directly marked down. Comparatively, you have discounts. And so discounts is when you offer a code. So instead of having the product physically marked down to $80, it would still be $90 on the website, but there would be some 20% off discount code that would be circulating either on the header of your website, on the landing page, on the ads, etc. People then add the $90 to cart, and then at checkout, it gets discounted down to $80. And the reason why this is important is because when you do it through an actual discount code, Shopify will actually capture this amount and show it to you. And so we can see for this brand, they had $46,574 of revenue of the actual products, but then $2,458 of discounts were applied at checkout, different discount codes, which obviously reduces the amount of revenue that they collect. But then they're also collecting shipping at checkout. And so they're collecting an additional $8,000 in shipping at checkout, which then you minus the $2,000, you add the $7,000, you get to a net revenue of $44,000. And so the reason why understanding discounts is important within the P&L is it allows you to see why cost of goods might be improving or going down. And so an example is that if discounts go up, let's say it's November and you run much heavier discount codes that everyone has access to, you're running 20% off store-wide, you might do the exact same amount of revenue as the prior month, but your discount rate, and this can sometimes be represented as discount rate as a percentage form, goes up. And so let's say as a dollar form, this goes up to, let's call it $7,000. Now, you could outweigh and do more revenue here. And so we could add $7,000 into actual gross revenue as well. And so you might think you've done a better month, but because of all the discounting, you will actually end up with a higher cost of goods in proportion to the same revenue amount. And so your cost of delivery percentage will actually go up, and you'll have less flow through of revenue down to net profit. And so that's why understanding how much you're actually discounting is really important, as that is a lever that you have to be able to improve the P&L. And that is why we are breaking these out. And it's because all of these three components, being discounts, returns, and shipping, these are all levers to improve the profitability of the business. And so the first one being discounts. If your discounts are too high, you know that obviously needs to get rectified. Now, if you try to decrease the rate of discounting, and you start losing a lot of revenue and you start losing a lot of demand and your MER starts to slip, you know that you have a core demand issue. People won't buy the product for the price that you currently have it at. And so that's either a branding issue. People don't see the value in the brand and the product. It might be a positioning issue. It might be simply a price elasticity issue. You're priced too high for your particular product in your particular niche. And so that's obviously something that you need to look at and troubleshoot. Number 2 is returns. So this brand is lucky enough to have $0 in returns here. But obviously if returns were up at $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, which is quite common as a percentage of total revenue, particularly for fashion brands, this is something that we want to be directly addressing as well. Because if we can minimize returns, we can increase net revenue. And so once again, these are levers that we can pull on to increase net revenue. And so that's why skipping straight to net revenue, yes, might be a helpful exercise for simplifying down the P&L, but not necessarily a simple exercise for being able to make business level decisions and improve the profitability of the business. So here returns aren't an issue, so let's just skip past it, but obviously that's something you would want to troubleshoot. And then lastly, we have shipping, and this specifically is actually shipping collected at checkout. And so once someone adds something to cart and they go to the checkout page, if anyone's ever bought off an e-com brand before, you'll obviously get charged shipping at the end. Now you might have free shipping, and so you don't get charged, or you might get charged. But this is obviously revenue that we want to encapsulate as well. But we do want to segment it out, because this is very different revenue from just even consumer psychology than the revenue of the product. Because the revenue of the product, people are associating with the value of the product. The revenue collected at shipping is the value associated with shipping. It has nothing to do with the value associated with the product. And so there might be an opportunity to improve this particular figure, either up or down, or this might be a point of concern and a point of clarity as to why we're having demand issues. We might be collecting way too much shipping at checkout. And in fact, for this brand, you can see they're collecting a lot of shipping at checkout in proportion to the amount of product. And so this is something that if I was them, I would really want to understand, why are we collecting so much here? Maybe we want to decrease our rates slightly and increase the price of our product, and that might overall increase demand. And so this is once again another lever that we need to be looking at, because this is serious revenue that's being collected at this stage within the purchasing journey. And then obviously all of these summed together goes and outputs our final net revenue figure. And this is where, and I've seen this time and time again with actual P&Ls when looking into zero accounts, is that clients have asked me and they've gone, well, in January, when you look at our gross margin figure within our P&L, it says 40%. But then in Feb, our gross margin figure drops to 30, realistically, probably like 36%. And they ask, why did we lose 4% here? Because 4% is massive, particularly if the brand's operating on 10% net, which is fairly standard. If you lose 4%, that means you're losing 40% of your net profit. It's a massive loss here, particularly if you're relying on this as income of some sort, or if you're relying on this as free cash flow to grow the business. This is a massive difference. And then when you look at the P&L, if it's just pulling in cash collected and reconciled within the accounting platform, you're not going to see any of these demand levers above here. And so you're not really going to be able to accurately identify what caused gross margin to go down. Was it a change in the product portfolio that was sold in that particular month? So more products were getting sold that had a lower gross margin. Was it due to any kind of changes in manufacturing and purchase costs, potentially, where we could look at that within the buying of the P&L. But when it comes to discounting, was it just because we discounted heavier in Feb? I have no idea unless I have access to these 4 lines. Was it because returns went up? That's something I see all the time, is that gross margin drops substantially in a month and the brand goes, well, yes, we hit MER targets. Yes, we hit volume targets, etc. All of our KPIs are getting hit. But they go, our gross margin, our net profit went down 6% last month and we made no money. And it's only till I get access to the P&L that I can say, yeah, well, you made no money because returns went up by $6,000. And so why did that happen? Because that's the issue. The marketing efficiency isn't the issue. The top line revenue wasn't the issue. The gross revenue wasn't the issue. It's that returns spiked. Oh, that's because we had a product in that was damaged and so we got a lot of returns. Okay, cool. Well, now we've identified why we weren't profitable last month. And not to shift blame or accountability in any way, but it was due to the returns. Every other metric in the entire P&L remained stable. And you can only see that if you have access to these top 4 line items that show you the demand levers. It's really important to understand this. This also leads into another concept as well, which is that you can break the P&L down. And let's actually just grab the eraser here. Is you can begin to view the P&L as this section right here is demand. So this shows you how much demand exists for this particular product. This section ends up being efficiency in production. So this is how efficient are you being in the production and the manufacturing of the product. The next section right here, which is just direct advertising and marketing, is your efficiency in distribution. So how efficiently can you distribute the product and create awareness? And then lastly, you have operating expenses, which is OPEX down to EBITDA, which is efficiency in operations. And so when you're looking at a business from a really high level, the P&L can actually tell you quite a bit, which is how much demand does this business have? How efficiently can they produce the product and distribute the product? How efficiently can they distribute the messaging or the marketing of the product? And then lastly, how efficient are they in operations? And then that ultimately comes down to really and we actually have a video on this on the Blue Sense Digital YouTube channel, which is this is the 3 levers that exist in direct to consumer e-commerce. Which is that if you want to be successful in direct to consumer e-commerce and you want to scale rapidly, so you're not scaling like this, you're scaling like this. Every single time I've ever seen this, the business has had one of these 3 things, which is that they've either been incredibly efficient in production, meaning cost of delivery was sub 20%, meaning they had above 80% gross margin. Number 2 is they were efficient in distribution. So they had either an incredible ad team, incredible product market fit, which allowed for incredibly high return on ad spend and low CPAs, or they had some other distribution channel that facilitated really strong direct-to-consumer distribution. That might have been a particular influencer, that might have been a particular PR piece. It's something that allows for effective distribution. And then lastly, efficiency in operations. And so this actually isn't possible until you're at least really a $3 million brand, because anything under 3 mil, you're just guaranteed to have operating expenses be above 10%. But once you start to achieve scale, this is when brands can really start to build leverage in the fact that they remain incredibly lean and have operating expenses at 7, 8, 9%. And all that does is it opens up percentage margin on the P&L that you can then go and allocate to distribution. And so you can go and spend 40, 50%, 60% on distribution because you're so lean in operating expenses, which just allows you to out-advertise all of your competitors. And so that's the breakdown of how you can visualize the P&L in terms of its 4 sections. And that is also the additional section that we've just added up at the top here, let's go into the second core change that we made to this P&L, which is that we've added in first time. And so all the numbers that we're looking at here are not total numbers for the business. These are numbers just for first-time customers. And so this is just first-time customer gross revenue. This is just first-time customer discount codes. This is just first-time customer returns. This is just first-time customer shipping collected. This is just first-time customer COGS, fulfillment of shipping, transaction fees. This is 100% of our direct advertising and marketing. And the reason behind this is that we approach, and I would recommend that you approach, direct advertising and marketing as an engine for, or a lever for, new customer acquisition. And I say that, I'm going to say this quite strongly because I've never seen data that has supported otherwise, is that advertising spend on both Meta and Google should be close to 100% allocated to new customer acquisition. You should have heavy audience exclusions on existing customers. You should have all of your campaigns and theory behind campaign structures being gearing towards trying to maximize net new users on the platform to convert them into new customers. And the reason why I say that with such a strong degree of belief is that I've seen convincing data time and time again from industry partners, from agencies, from internal experiments that we have run that showcases that when you allocate spend to existing customers, you do not see an incremental return over just sending through direct channels like email and SMS. If people like the product and they want to return, they will return regardless of advertising spend being pushed behind Facebook and Google ads. Now, very, very different story for existing customers. You obviously need to build engagement and awareness of the product. But for an existing customer, not a new customer, an existing customer, paid ads does very little, if not zero, to drive them back. And so you should not be spending on those users. That is just wasted spend. And so because of that theory and that approach, which is grounded in quite a lot of data, we allocate all of the direct advertising and marketing to the first-time customer P&L, which means that when we split into these returning customer P&L, which is the other option here, when you hit this toggle and all the numbers will change, direct advertising and marketing goes to zero. Now, why is it so important to be able to generate a P&L that is just based on first-time customers? And this is arguably 10x more important than returning customers. You can generate a returning customer P&L, and we obviously have a tool internally that does this dynamically, so where we can just toggle between first-time and returning. The returning isn't really that important. To be honest, the first time is the one that's the most important to me. And it's because we run paid ads, and paid ads is responsible for customer acquisition. And so I want to see what's actually happening on the first-time customer P&L. The most important thing that I want to see is, are we losing money on the first-time customer P&L? And that might sound ridiculous, but this is so much more common than you would think. If a brand has any degree of returning customers, let's say 20% of their daily revenue comes from returning customers, it's very likely that those returning customers are driving majority of the profit contribution and is skewing the KPIs towards overspending on acquisition. It's one of the most common things I see. And we just put a video out about this, which is called Turning a 7-Figure Brand Profitable in 30 Days. And so in this video, you can see that I'm using the first-time customer P&L, a more simplified structure for the sake of the video. And then we've also got a cohort analysis here. So we're looking at blended CAC over time. We're looking at 30-day LTCM to CAC ratios, which is a whole nother training in itself. But then we're looking at whether we're repaying CAC or not. So are we profitable on first purchase? So it's another way to look at the first-time customer P&L, but instead we're looking at it at a cohort level with individual unit sizes rather than looking at total volume. And what you can see is they're not repaying CAC. In fact, they haven't repaid CAC for about 6 to 7 months. However, this brand is profitable. These guys make money every month. They don't make a lot of money for the size that they are, but they make a few $1,000s in profit. And so they're obviously looking at everything and they're trying to figure out, why aren't we making as much profit as we should be? And they're just way overspending on acquisition because they're making so much profit from returning customers. Because they don't delineate the returning customer profit and the first-time customer profit, it all just gets pulled into one profit number right here. And so because they see, for example, in this instance, and this is a fantastic example that demonstrates the importance of being able to do this, is that you might look at December and you'll go, okay, we made $2,000 in profit, $58,000 revenue, $17,000 spend. Fantastic. Let's go and spend another $2,000 next month, as that was a great MER of 3.89 and things are looking good. Now, the issue is, once you go and delineate this, and so let's make this the first time, and let's make this the second time, or the returning. And first-time customers is making up 60% of total revenue, and returning customers are making up 40% of total revenue in December. Well, look what that ends up doing to these two different P&Ls. And all we're doing is we're just taking December once again, and we're just splitting it in half, or not necessarily in half, but we're splitting it into two, decomposing it based on first-time and returning. And you can see the first-time customer P&L is actually losing money. We're losing $3,000 in December on the acquisition and the paid media strategy. But on returning customers, we're making $9,000. And so overall, this is summing up to a $2,000 gain. But this was not because we had a strong customer acquisition month, and this was not because paid ads drove a bunch of profit. It had to do with the returning customers that came off the back of acquisition for the last 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And so going and scaling up spend here is probably you just going and scaling up losses. And you want to make sure, okay, you can make the argument that we can operate the first-time customer negative, and we can say that these people will turn into the returning customer P&L, which will continue to fuel profits. But you need to have really granular control over a cohort lift over time if that's a strategy that you want to be employing. And what I mean by that is that if you're acquiring customers unprofitably, let's say at a blended CAC of $30, you need to be very aware of what customers turn into in terms of gross profit contribution at the 30-day, at the 90-day, at the 180-day mark. And if they never come up and lift to the blended CAC in which you first acquired them to, you'll never make money on the cohort. Or maybe they do come to that level, but they only exceed it by $1. Okay, well, all well and good that we're going and acquiring all these customers, but if we're only ever going to make $1 off them, and they're going to spend $200 with the brand over the lifetime, that's not a very good net profit. In fact, that's not even a net profit, that's a contribution profit. It's a terrible percentage to be operating on. It's 0.5%. And so if you're running a negative first-time customer P&L, most brands aren't cut out to even do it in the first place. You really would want external financing, and you'd want an operator of this business who has been in the e-commerce space for at least 4 to 5 years and in the business space for at least 10. Because the complexities in running a business that's not first-time purchase profitable, it's just too high. It's so, the risk profile of the business is so high as well. Do not recommend it. And so in this case, with this particular business, immediately you would want to be able to identify this, and you would want to immediately start looking at fixing it. Now, how would you fix it? Well, I would want to be looking at, can we cut back spend? What happened in the other months on the first-time customer P&L when we spent less? Or alternatively, how can we make this spend incremental? Let's just do a basic assumption and say there's overspend on brand search, there's overspend on retargeting on Facebook, and there's no audience exclusions, and so it's not doing a very good job at new customer acquisition, and we can cut $2,000 out. Well, that's going to add $2,000 to the P&L. This is going to go up to $4,000 at the end of the day, which is going to double EBITDA from 3 to 6 to 7%. And to being able to delineate the P&L between first-time and returning customers is a really important ability and strategy that you should be employing to be able to identify the profitability of acquisition, and then therefore how that ties into core KPIs. And so that leads into the very last part of this video, is that you'll see that, and obviously you'll get access to this Excel sheet so you can go in and play around with your own numbers here. But down the bottom, we've simplified down the percentage breakdown just into acquisition MER, and then this is acquisition MER as well, but it's just in a number figure rather than a percentage figure. And so this ends up being the better KPI for a lot of brands than just a flat MER. The reason why you might still want to orientate around MER though, is just if acquisition MER adds too much complexity to the dialogue. Now, I would argue that if you don't want to discuss something due to the complexity of the dialogue, that you need to improve your account management and communication skills to be able to articulate these things, which is why this video exists. This is not only a training in being able to add this part to the P&L and understand demand levers, to better identify opportunities for improvement within the business. It's not only to show you that you can cut a P&L down by first time and returning customers, but it's also an exercise in showing you how you can communicate this to people, because the communication of this is the most important piece. Yes, you can understand and you can put the P&L out, but if you can't explain why returns caused the dip last month, or why we should actually decrease spend because the first time customer P&L isn't profitable, and the lift over time if that cohort isn't ever going to be profitable, then obviously you'll never be able to implement any of these recommendations anyway. And so acquisition MER in majority of instances is the better KPI than MER. Looking at first-time customer metrics is generally a much better KPI if you're a paid ads partner, or if you're an e-commerce brand watching this and you're working with a paid ads partner, because you don't want to hold the paid ads partner accountable for returning customer revenue. This is nothing to do with paid ads. This is all to do with product drops, email and SMS communication frequency, and then the fundamental DNA of the business, really, is that if you sell consumables, your returning customer revenue will be much higher than the person selling furniture. It's just built into the DNA of the business. And if you understand that, and if you know that by splitting out these P&Ls, you will set better KPIs. Because the consumable brand, for example, you might actually want to run the first-time customer P&L on about break-even. But the furniture brand, you do not want to run the first-time customer P&L on break-even at all. You probably want to run this percentage at about 20%. And so you want a 5 acquisition MER. And then how that layers up to MER, it doesn't matter, because the MER target is going to, or the MER number is going to change just in accordance with returning customer revenue. And that's why MER can tend to be a really poor measure of success. Because if you're keeping acquisition MER stable, let me show this. So if you're keeping acquisition MER here, which means that you could look at this as a bar chart, this is new customer revenue, and you're keeping new customer revenue stable and spend stable. And so you've got consistency here, but then you have returning customer revenue. And so this might be the returning customer revenue, then it's here, then it's here, then it might go up to here. And these obviously stack together to get total revenue. What's then going to end up happening is that when you look at acquisition MER on a monthly basis, every single month across this year, acquisition MER was between a 2 to, let's say, a 1.9. And so it was super stable. But if you look at MER across this year, it might have been as high as, in this month, might have been as high as a 3.2. And then down here, it might have been as low as a 2.1. And so you have these massive MER fluctuations occurring on a month-on-month basis, and you might be course-correcting paid ads and consistently making changes based on the core indicator of how MER is changing. But the MER figure has absolutely nothing to do with anything that you're doing in paid ads or anything to do with the acquisition strategy, and therefore you are making poor decisions and consistently changing strategies based on a bad signal. Acquisition MER ends up being the better signal. And so that's also a side tangent about why the majority of businesses, acquisition MER is going to be a significantly better KPI to hold yourself to for driving decision-making within the business, as opposed to MER.